Here we have the draft of the skirt with one big dart. This you wouldn't normally, like the other pieces of the block, you could theoretically just copy and make them part of a style. But this one you wouldn't, because of all of the dart intake being on this one spot. It's very unbalanced and it will look kind of funny. But we want to test it just to make sure that everything's still lining up, that the dart on the skirt, like this dart placement area, is still matching to our bodices. So even though it's going to look pretty funky, we're going to go ahead and sew it up. So as per usual, the first thing I did was prep my muslin. So I ironed it and steamed it and got it nice and flat and crisp. And I guess I will start with the front here. So I will put it on my muslin about a ½ inch away from the selvage. And then I will measure. I'm going to use a little bit shorter ruler. That one's too short. That one's too long. Goldilocks of rulers over here. This one might work. And this one might work. I'll move this away so that the glare isn't bugging you. So this ruler near the hem lined up with my selvage, and I'm going to make sure that the edge of my skirt is at least a ½ inch away from my selvage. And when I do that, it looks like this bottom corner of my skirt is about 10¼ inches away from the selvage. So I want the same thing to be true up here at the top. So I want, ooh, I'm pretty close. I'm just going to put my finger here so that I don't move that corner. And then I'm just going to try and push this one until my center front quarter from the edge. So I should have space to have a ½ inch seam allowance over here without having any selvage. And then I should also have space to have ½ inch seam allowance up here without running off. It looks like I could actually come up a little higher, but I'm just going to leave it. I have enough press down here that I'll be fine. Now that I have that, I'm just going to make a mark for where my center front is at the hem and at the waist. And then I'll get that long ruler back, and the L square works well too. And I will make my center front grain line. Then I will take my skirt and place it back on my center front grain line. And then I will make a mark for where the hem is and for where the HBL is and for the waist. And then I'll just square that a little bit, just like a total of a ½ inch, so 1/4 inch on each side of the line. Then I'll flip my skirt over and nestle it in those corners. Make sure that my HBL is still lining up with the HBL mark that I made. And then come over here and make a mark for the HBL on this side. And a mark for the hem on this side. Then I can take my long ruler and draw the hem. Oops, it looks like my ruler slipped. And draw the HBL. And then I could make a mark for where the side seam is. And then I can connect those dots. So now I have from my HBL to the bottom part of my skirt drawn. So now all I really need to do is trace the top part of my skirt. Just for funsies, I'll make a mark for where my guideline is. I'll make a mark for where each of those punch holes would be. And then I'll trace off the center front, or sorry, the front waist. Make sure I get those notches. And then I'll trace off the side seam. Now I can flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to pull my table closer to me. So that we are still under the camera. So now I have my, let me make sure I make marks for my guidelines. Punch hole, punch hole, punch hole, guideline. Go ahead and draw my guideline in. Draw my dart legs. Pencil got stuck in something on my table and made a very ugly dart leg. So this one I can't see my dart leg very well. So I'll put my paper back down, line up my HBL, line up my center, and then make sure my other notch is visible, and then trace this notch. And I'm drawing these darts to the vanishing point that's closest to the waist. It's actually a pivot point, but so I have my 4.5-inch darts there. Now I need seam allowance. I'm not going to put any seam allowance on the hem. I'm just going to put 1/2-inch seam allowance on the side seams and the waist. Okay, so I'll need to cut this out. So I have my front cut out now, and it's mirrored on the center. So I'll set that aside and set up my muslin to follow a similar procedure for my back skirt. The only difference being that the back is cut too. So instead of mirroring it and making it one whole piece, I'll put 2 inches between the front and the back. Let's pretend. Sorry, not between the front and back, between the 2 back pieces. So 1 inch seam allowance for one side of the back and 1 inch seam allowance for the other side of the back. So let me get that set up. Similar to what I did in the front, I'm measuring from the selvage to make sure that the top of the skirt and the bottom of the skirt are equidistant from the selvage, and that there is enough space all the way around for my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I will draw my center back grain line. So I'll make some marks for center back, waist, and center back, hem, HBL, and HBL at the side seam, and side seam hem, then I'll draw center back grain line, and I'll square it out a couple inches. And then I'm on track. Before I go any further, I'll flip it over, push it out, two inches, and then make sure everything's smooth. Make sure everything's still lined up. And then make a line for side seam HBL. Side seam hem. Center front waist. And then just connect those all the way across. the hems all the way across. Square the center backs a little bit. And then draw my center back seam allowance. And then where the center back of my other side of my skirt will be placed. And then my side seam from hem to HBL. And over here, side seam from hem to HBL. Then I nestle my skirt back into position with my HBL lined up, my center back lined up, my center back waist lined up, my HBL at the side seam lined up, and my side seam lined up with the line that I drew. And then I can just sketch in my skirt shape from the HBL up. So grabbing my dart notches, making marks for the punch holes, tracing my waist, and tracing my side hip. And then I'll flip this over and do the same on this side. Only this time the two back pieces are 2 inches apart. I'm going to use my extra long, oh, I don't see my guideline down here at the bottom. So let me just transfer that. Draw in my dart to the vanishing point that is from the waist. And then I'll add my seam allowance and trace the other side. So now I have both pieces traced with seam allowance added. Now I'm going to So now I have my two backs cut out. There's 1 inch seam allowance down the center back. I have my darts drawn in. I have my HBL drawn in. I have 1/2 inch seam allowance everywhere but the center back. I also have my guidelines drawn in, just so that I can see where they hit on the dress form and decide if I like it. I'm also going to put my name on it. And then again, I have the front in one piece, also with my grain line and my guidelines and my HBL. So it's mirrored on the center front, and I have 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and I have my darts drawn in, and so I think I'm ready to sew.